They didn't lose these books. They didn't forget them. They were removed. What if I told you that some of the most important texts about Jesus, were deliberately erased from history, not because they were fake, but because they were too powerful? In the year 363 AD, a group of bishops gathered at what is now known as the Council of Laodicea. Their goal was simple: to decide which books people were allowed to read. These weren't random writings. These were texts early Christians had trusted for generations. Stories, teachings, and visions that describe Jesus in ways most people today have never heard. But instead of preserving them, many of these texts were excluded. Over time, copies disappeared. Some were lost. Some were no longer copied, in ways most people today have never heard. And just like that, entire ideas faded from history. Now ask yourself something. Why would certain texts stop being passed down? Some historians believe it was because of the ideas they contained. They described a version of Jesus that felt very different from what later became familiar. Not just a teacher, not just a guide, but something far greater, something cosmic, a presence described as powerful, beyond human understanding, connected to every part of existence. That's what some of these texts suggest. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while these texts faded in much of the world, one place continued to preserve them. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, far from the influence of Rome, communities continued copying these writings. Year after year, generation after generation, they copied through war, through isolation, and through centuries of change. They weren't trying to preserve a secret, they simply believed these texts were important. And inside those texts is a version of Jesus most people have never encountered. Not the familiar image seen in later art and tradition, but something far more expansive. The Bible most people know today is not the only version that ever existed. Different traditions preserve different texts, and some of them tell a much bigger story. One of those traditions comes from Ethiopia, a church that has preserved ancient writings for over 1,500 years. Their Bible contains more books than most modern versions, including texts that were never widely accepted in the Western world. Among them is a text known as the Book of Enoch, a work that was once widely known in the ancient world. Fragments of this text were even found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means it existed long before modern Christianity formed. And what it describes is very different from what most people are used to hearing. In these writings, Jesus is not only a teacher, not only a guide, but a figure of immense authority, described as a judge over all existence, surrounded by beings of immense power, seated in a place beyond ordinary reality. Now compare that to one of the last books in the New Testament, the book of Revelation. It describes a figure with eyes like fire, a voice like rushing waters, and a presence that overwhelms everything around it. The similarities are striking, so much so that many scholars believe these ideas were connected, which raises an interesting question. If these ideas existed early on, why did they become less common over time? Some believe it's because these texts present a very direct idea. That connection to the divine is not something distant, but something closer than most people think. An idea that doesn't rely on institutions or intermediaries, but focuses on a personal understanding. Whether you see these texts as history, interpretation, or something else entirely, they offer a perspective that most people have never explored. And once you start looking into it, you begin to realize there may be more to the story than we were ever told. And maybe the real question isn't what was removed, but why it was removed, and what it might mean if those ideas were never truly lost. Because if even a part of this is true, then the story most people know might only be the beginning. And if you enjoy videos like this, make sure to subscribe, because there's a lot more history that most people have never seen.